Open in the half-light of a Japanese zoo at dusk. Something small is awake. A baby monkey, 6 months old, barely 500 grams, sits in a corner of his enclosure. Around him, dozens of macaques groom each other, chase each other, huddle for warmth. He watches them. And then, slowly, he reaches out and wraps his arms around something that cannot reach back. A stuffed orangutan, a plush toy. He pulls it close, presses his tiny face into its synthetic fur, and closes his eyes. His name is Punch, and what he is doing in this moment is one of the most scientifically profound, emotionally devastating things a living creature can do. He is searching for a mother who was never there. Punch, known in Japan as Punchy-kun, was born on July 26, 2025, at Ichikawa City Zoo in Chiba Prefecture, just east of Tokyo. He weighed approximately 500 grams. His mother, a first-time parent under the punishing stress of a Japanese summer, did not nurse him, did not hold him, did not acknowledge him. She simply turned away. Zoo staff moved quickly. Keepers Kosuke Shikano and Shunpei Miyakoshi began hand-rearing Punch around the clock, bottle feeds, careful monitoring, and something else. They kept him close to the sounds and smells of the other macaques, so that something of his primate instincts might survive long enough to matter. But a bottle is not a body. A gloved hand is not a mother's fur. Baby Japanese macaques do not grow independently. They are born in a state of total physical dependence that would seem almost terrifying if you stopped to think about it. From the first second of life, an infant macaque must grip. It must cling. Its hands are designed, literally shaped by millions of years of evolution, to lock around the body of another. And that grip is not merely reflex. It is, it turns out, the first language of survival. The zookeepers tried towels. They tried blankets. Punch rejected them all. Then someone brought a stuffed orangutan. Long-limbed, textured fur, something that felt in the darkness like another primate. Punch wrapped his arms around it and did not let go. His keepers called it Aura Mama, a surrogate mother made of polyester and stuffing. When videos of Punch clinging to Aura Mama surfaced online in early February 2026, something happened that science has long understood, but the internet experienced as if for the first time. The world broke open. The hashtag #HangInTherePunch was shared tens of thousands of times. People wept for a monkey they had never met, in a zoo they had never visited, in a country most of them would never see. Visitors flew to Ichikawa City Zoo simply to stand at the enclosure railing and watch him, to witness something they could not name but felt entirely. The question is, why? To answer that, you have to go backward. Not months, not decades. 65 million years. When the first small, warm-blooded mammals survived the extinction event that killed the dinosaurs, they did so partly because of something at once unremarkable and extraordinary. They carried their young. Inside their bodies first, and then against them. Not in eggs left on the ground to fend for themselves, but physically attached. Held, warmed, fed, carried. This was not sentimentality. This was engineering. A mammalian infant, born early and neurologically incomplete, could finish developing outside the womb. but only if it remained in contact with a warm body. The heartbeat, the breath, the heat, the motion, these were not comforts. They were the developmental environment itself. For primates, who spend more time in this helpless state than almost any other mammal on Earth, the stakes were even higher. A baby rhesus macaque left alone on the forest floor lives, on average, a matter of hours. The clinging reflex is not a preference. It is the entire strategy. What evolution did, then, was wire that dependency into the deepest architecture of the brain, not as a behavior that could be chosen or unchosen, but as a biological imperative as fundamental as breathing. The need to hold, the need to be held. This is what scientists would come to call attachment. And for much of the 20th century, they had it almost completely, catastrophically wrong. In the 1940s and 1950s, the prevailing view among psychologists and pediatricians was disarmingly simple. Love followed food. A mother mattered to her infant because she provided milk. Bonding was transactional. Warmth was beside the point. Many hospitals routinely separated newborns from their mothers for days, sometimes weeks. Experts actively warned against excessive holding of infants, arguing that too much comfort would create unhealthy dependency. It seemed rational. It was devastatingly false. The man who proved it wrong worked in a basement laboratory at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. His name was Harlow, and he did not set out to study love. He was studying learning in rhesus monkeys when he noticed something no one had thought to examine. The infant monkeys in his lab were becoming attached to the cloth pads lining their cages, not to the technicians who fed them, not to the wire frames holding their milk bottles, to soft material. He designed an experiment so simple, it is almost embarrassing in hindsight. He gave newborn infant monkeys 2 surrogate mothers. One was made of bare wire, but it held a bottle of warm milk. The other was wire covered in soft terry cloth, textured, holdable, but it provided no food at all. The question he was asking was essentially this: what is a mother? Is she food, or is she something else entirely? The answer arrived immediately, and completely. The infant monkeys chose the cloth mother. Overwhelmingly, consistently, across every variation of the experiment. When they were hungry, they went to the wire mother, fed quickly, and returned. When they were frightened, when a loud mechanical toy was placed inside the cage, a wind-up spider, a drum-banging bear, the infants did not run toward the source of their food. They ran toward soft fur. They buried their faces in it. Their stress levels fell almost immediately upon contact. Harlow named what he had discovered contact comfort, and the implications were seismic.
All right, punch.
Because love, it turned out, was not a reward for being fed. It was not learned, not conditioned, not the product of association between a face and a full stomach. It was something prior to all of that, something older, something the infant arrived in the world already needing with an urgency that overrode hunger itself. But when Harlow followed those infant monkeys into adulthood, the picture darkened considerably. The monkeys raised with only surrogate mothers, even the warm, soft cloth ones, grew into something fractured. They were timid, asocial, unable to mate, unable to form bonds. The females who eventually became mothers were often neglectful or outright abusive. They had been given comfort in a moment of fear, but they had never been given a real relationship. The surrogate could lower their heart rate in the dark. It could not teach them how to exist among their kind. Here was the first revelation. Touch alone was not enough. Contact comfort was necessary, but it was not sufficient. What the infant needed was not just warmth, it was synchrony. A relationship with something that moved and responded and communicated back. Something alive. Punch's aura mama could calm him in the night, but it could not teach him how to be a macaque. Around the same time that Harlow was working in Wisconsin, a British psychiatrist named John Bowlby was arriving at the same conclusion from a completely different direction. Bowlby was not studying monkeys. He was studying children. Specifically, children who had been separated from their parents during and after the Second World War. Children in hospitals, in orphanages, in wartime evacuation. Children who, despite being clothed and housed and fed, were failing, becoming withdrawn, losing language, losing something essential that no chart could measure and no nurse could name. Bowlby called what he observed maternal deprivation. And he proposed something that sounds obvious now, but was genuinely radical in 1951. The bond between an infant and its caregiver was not a side effect of nourishment. It was a biological drive, a survival mechanism as ancient and as urgent as any in the human genome. His student, Mary Ainsworth, would later develop what she called the strange situation test, a careful laboratory protocol in which infants were briefly separated from their mothers and their responses were observed. What she found was a taxonomy of attachment. Secure children who used their caregivers as a base for exploration, returning confidently after separation. Anxious children who could not let go, clinging, inconsolable. Avoidant children who had already learned in their first year of life not to expect anything at all. These patterns, Ainsworth found, did not stop in infancy. They persisted into adolescence, into adulthood, into the kinds of parents those children would themselves one day become. Attachment, it turned out, was not a feeling. It was an architecture. Built in the earliest months of life, inscribed into neural structure, carried forward like a blueprint into every relationship that would follow. And nowhere was this clearer. Nowhere was the cost of its absence more precisely measurable than in Romania. In 1989, the fall of Nicolae Ceausescu's government revealed something the world was not prepared to see. Behind the walls of state institutions, there were children, hundreds of thousands of them. Placed in orphanages at birth, under a regime that had outlawed contraception and abortion while providing almost nothing to support the children that policy produced. These children were fed. They were housed. They received what was, on paper, care. But they did not have mothers. They did not have attachment figures. In some institutions, there was one caregiver for 60 or more children. They were not held except to be cleaned, not spoken to except in instruction, not met, not truly seen by any consistent, warm, responsive presence. When researchers from Harvard arrived to study what had happened, they did not find emotional damage alone. They found structural alteration of the brain itself. MRI scans of young Romanian adults who had been in institutions as infants, people who had since been adopted into loving families, who had received years of good care, showed something that stopped the researchers cold. The longer a child had spent in an institution, the smaller the total volume of their brain. Each additional month of deprivation corresponded to a measurable reduction in brain tissue. Not a metaphor, not a psychological description, a physical reduction, visible, quantifiable in the mass of the human brain. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for emotional regulation, empathy, and decision-making, was among the most affected. So was the amygdala. The children showed higher rates of attention deficit disorder, lower measured intelligence, difficulty forming bonds, a pattern researchers called indiscriminate friendliness, reaching for any adult, any stranger, because they had never learned the specific shape of a true attachment. They had been kept alive. They had not been made whole. And the cruelest detail of all, for children who had been in institutions beyond a certain window of early development, even the warmest and most devoted adoptive families could not fully reverse what absence had done. The brain had needed something during a specific period. That period had passed, and the brain had reorganized itself around the gap. What does it mean, then, that a 500-gram baby monkey in a Japanese zoo searched through everything he was given? Towels, blankets, the hands of kind zookeepers, and chose a stuffed animal because it was the closest thing available to something that could be held. It means that attachment is not a luxury. It is not comfort or sentiment or a cultural preference. It is, at the deepest level of biology, the medium through which a brain learns to become itself. When a mother holds her infant, any mother, any infant across the primate order, something extraordinary occurs at the chemical level. Oxytocin, the neuropeptide at the center of all bonding behavior, floods both systems simultaneously. In the mother, it activates the brain's reward circuits, the same pathways that signal food and safety and the relief of danger. In the infant, it suppresses cortisol, quiets the stress response, and begins building what researchers describe as biobehavioral synchrony, the state in which two nervous systems become, briefly and profoundly, one. Skin-to-skin contact in premature infants, a practice now standard in neonatal intensive care, reduces cortisol levels by more than 2.5 times within a single session. 2.5 times. The difference between a nervous system in crisis and one moving toward calm, produced not by medication, not by intervention, but by warmth and contact and the faint percussion of another heartbeat. And yet, something in this story resists full capture by the instruments we use to study it. We can measure the oxytocin, we can trace the neural circuits, we can document the prefrontal cortex volume of a Romanian orphan and plot it against months spent without love, on a graph that is among the most quietly horrifying documents in the history of developmental science. We understand the mechanism, but the experience, the thing that it is like to need another creature so completely that you will press your face into synthetic fur just to feel something like held, that remains, at some level, beyond the reach of measurement. Why does a baby monkey reach for the one object in his world that carries the texture of fur? Why? Does a premature infant, placed against a mother's chest, immediately slow its breathing to match hers, as if it recognizes in some wordless register that this rhythm is home? Why do we, thousands of miles away, separated by an entire species, feel something visceral when we watch Punch cling to a stuffed toy in a zoo east of Tokyo? Because the need he is expressing is not his alone. It is ours. It is the same need that sent Harlow's monkeys running past their food source toward a cloth arm. that left its permanent signature on the brains of children who were fed but never held, that fires oxytocin through a first-time mother the moment her infant skin meets hers. It is written in the oldest part of us, the part that survived extinction not because it was strong, but because it held on. We are the descendants of creatures who clung. Every single one of us. The ones who didn't leave descendants to tell the story. On February 18th, 2026, Punch did something he had never done before. He let another macaque groom him. In the language of primates, grooming is not hygiene. It is the oldest form of social currency. The act of moving your fingers through the fur of another creature and saying, in a language without words, "You are safe. I am here. You belong." Punch had been trying to find this for months. He had carried Aura Mama through the enclosure. He had used it as a shield when the other macaques scolded him. He had slept curled around it in the cold. Slowly, painstakingly, the zookeepers had introduced him to others. There were setbacks and scolding, and moments the zoo had to address publicly to reassure a watching world that what looked like cruelty was actually something more ordinary and more important than cruelty. It was learning. And then, one morning, another macaque sat beside him and began to groom. It is a small thing and an enormous thing at the same time. Because what Punch has been doing since the first night he wrapped his arms around a stuffed orangutan is not merely surviving. He has been doing what every creature shaped by 65 million years of mammalian evolution must eventually do. He has been learning how to be known. We do not fully understand why some mothers bond instantly and others turn away. We do not know the precise window during which early attachment becomes irreversible, or what determines whether a brain shaped by absence can truly, fully recover. We understand the chemicals and the circuits, but the experience itself, the raw, wordless, animal urgency of needing to be held, remains at some level past the edge of what we can measure. What we do know is this: the need is real. It is ancient. It runs through every living thing that has ever arrived in this world, small and incomplete, and reaching for something warm. It runs through us the way rivers run through stone, slowly, persistently, reshaping everything it touches. And somewhere in a zoo east of Tokyo, a 6-month-old monkey with a stuffed animal pressed against his chest is at this very moment, slowly and cautiously, finding his way home.